History flows like a river. Tell us what happened today in history.
Three Kingdoms period in China, in the summer of 263 AD, the fourth year of Jingyuan, Emperor Wei and Yuan, General Deng Ai of the state of Wei and General Zhang Wei of Junshi attacked Sichuan and defeated the resistance of the Shu Han army. In November, Deng Ai broke Mianzhu and killed Zhu Xan. In winter, Wei Jun attacked Chengdu. The Emperor of Shu Han, Liu Chan, had no choice but to adopt Dr. Guanglu's suggestion of Qianzhou. He sent Shang Shulong, Li Hu and Shizhang Zhangshao to Deng Ai to present the books of scholars and people who signed to ease the state, and the books stored in the treasury. He also capitulated himself to Deng Wen's military camp, and Shu Han died. In 264 AD, Liu Chan was sent to Luoyang, the capital of Wei dynasty, and was named Anligong by the state of Wei. On the evening of April 28, the 15th of March, 5th year of Wei Jingyuan, 1755 years ago, Sima Zhao, king of Jin dynasty, hosted a banquet for Liu Chan. During the banquet, singing and dancing became peaceful, occasionally accompanied by music and dance in Shu and the sad sound of national subjugation. It is sad that Shu Han surrendered his minister. Only Liu Chan laughed freely, indifferently and enjoyed it heartily. A few days later, Sima Zhao asked Liu Chan, "Do you miss the Shu land?" Liu said without hesitation, "This is a happy place, not Shu." The idiom, "La Busi Shu," was sent here. Future U.S. Senator and President James Monroe is born on this day in 1758. Monroe, a contemporary of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, was the last of the original revolutionaries to become president. He served in the Continental Army and was wounded in the shoulder at the Battle of Trenton. In New Jersey. Prior to becoming president, Monroe served as Washington's ambassador to France 1804 to 1807 and Madison's Secretary of State 1811 to 1817. He was also the first U.S. senator to become president and the first president to ride on the technological wonder of his era, the steamboat. Monroe's presidency is best known for his negotiation of the Missouri Compromise and his philosophy regarding territorial expansion in the Western Hemisphere, which became known as the Monroe Doctrine. In 1820, President Monroe signed into law the Missouri Compromise, also known as the Compromise Bill of 1820. The bill attempted to solve tensions over slavery by promising to add an equal number of slaveholding and non-slaveholding states into the Union in the future. Although Monroe realized that slavery conflicted with the values written into the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, he favored strong states' rights over federalism and feared the fissure over slavery would split the Union he and his contemporaries had fought so hard to establish. Passage of the Missouri Compromise contributed to the era of good feelings over which Monroe presided and facilitated his election to a second term. In his second inaugural address, Monroe optimistically pointed out that although the nation had struggled in its infancy, no serious conflict has arisen that was not solved peacefully between the federal and state governments. By steadily pursuing this course, he predicted, there is every reason to believe that our system will soon attain the highest degree of perfection of which human institutions are capable. In the end, though, the Missouri Compromise failed to permanently ease the underlying tensions caused by the slavery issue. The conflict that flared up during the bill's drafting presaged how the nation would eventually divide along territorial, economic and ideological lines 40 years later during the Civil War. Monroe's foreign policy fared better. In 1823, Monroe delivered a message to Congress outlining U.S. policy toward territorial expansion. He warned foreign nations with possessions in North America and the Western Hemisphere against any further expansion, saying that the U.S. would consider any additional colonial expansion as dangerous to America's peace and safety. In return, he promised not to interfere in these nations' existing colonial affairs. This policy, originally articulated by former President James Madison and fleshed out by Monroe's Secretary of State and future President John Quincy Adams, was thereafter referred to as the Monroe Doctrine. To those who knew him well, Monroe had a reputation as a hard-working and good-natured man who was a little old-fashioned when it came to personal dress. As president, he wore what was by then considered outdated Revolutionary War era attire. White House social life under Monroe was low-key. Both he and his wife Elizabeth preferred private, stately affairs modeled after European society to the larger, more lively parties hosted by some of Monroe's predecessors. Private and stately did not come cheap, however, and Monroe was forced to lobby Congress for money to refurbish the barely livable White House, which had been badly damaged in the War of 1812. After leaving office, Monroe tried to get Congress to reimburse him for additional personal funds he had spent on furniture for the White House. Partly as a consequence of funding White House furnishings with his own money, Monroe fell heavily into debt, and was forced to sell his Virginia estate and move in with his daughter, who lived in New York City. He died in 1831. On this day in 1945, Il Duce, Benito Mussolini, and his mistress, Clara Petacci, are shot by Italian partisans who had captured the couple as they attempted to flee to Switzerland. The 61-year-old deposed former dictator of Italy was established by his German allies as the figurehead of a puppet government in northern Italy during the German occupation toward the close of the war. As the Allies fought their way up the Italian peninsula, defeat of the Axis powers all but certain, Mussolini considered his options. Not wanting to fall into the hands of either the British or the Americans, and knowing that the communist partisans, who had been fighting the remnants of roving Italian fascist soldiers and thugs in the north, would try him as a war criminal, he settled on escape to a neutral country. He and his mistress made it to the Swiss border, only to discover that the guards had crossed over to the partisan side. Knowing they would not let him pass, he disguised himself in a Luftwaffe coat and helmet, hoping to slip into Austria with some German soldiers. His subterfuge proved incompetent, and he and Petacci were discovered by partisans and shot, their bodies then transported by truck to Milan, where they were hung upside down and displayed publicly for revilement by the masses. Following the defeat of his proposals for constitutional reform in a national referendum, Charles de Gaulle resigns as President of France. A veteran of World War I, de Gaulle unsuccessfully petitioned his country to modernize its armed forces between the wars. After Henri Pétain and other French leaders signed an armistice with Nazi Germany in June 1940, he fled to London, where he organized the Free French Forces and rallied French colonies to the Allied cause. His forces fought successfully in North Africa, and in June 1944 he was named head of the French government in exile. On August 26, following the Allied invasion of France, de Gaulle entered Paris in triumph. 3 months later, he was unanimously elected Provisional President of France. He resigned in January 1946, however, claiming he lacked sufficient governing power. De Gaulle formed a new political party that had only moderate electoral success, and in 1953 he retired. However, 5 years later, a military and civilian revolt in Algeria created a political crisis in France, and he was called out of retirement to lead the nation. A new constitution was passed, and in late December he was elected President of the Fifth Republic. During the next decade, President de Gaulle granted independence to Algeria and attempted to restore France to its former international stature by withdrawing from the US-dominated NATO alliance and promoting the development of French atomic weapons. However, student demonstrations and workers' strikes in 1968 eroded his popular support, and in 1969 his proposals for further constitutional reform were defeated in a national vote. On April 28, 1969, Charles de Gaulle, 79 years old, retired for good. He died the following year. A gas explosion beneath a busy city street in Daegu, South Korea, kills more than 100 people on this day in 1995. 60 children, some on their way to school, were among the victims of the blast. Daegu was a city of 2.2 million people, located about 150 miles south of Seoul. At the time of the explosion, an underground railroad was being constructed beneath the city streets. Metal sheets were put down in place of asphalt to cover holes in certain sections of downtown roads during the construction. At about 7:30 a.m., during a busy rush hour, a large explosion rumbled beneath the streets, blasting the metal sheets high into the air. Flames shot out from underground, some 150 feet high, throughout a 300-yard area. Cars were transformed into fireballs, and one was reported to have been thrown 30 feet into the air. Some pedestrians in the area were enveloped by fire, others further away were blown to the ground. Flaming debris hit people up to half of a mile away. The final death toll was 110, with hundreds injured. Rescue efforts were impeded by broken water mains that flooded the area in the aftermath. The precise cause of the explosion remains a mystery. Some believe that the gas pipe was accidentally hit by the railroad construction, while others argue that something must have sparked an existing leak. On April 28, 2001, April 6, 2001, Pioneer 10, which lost contact with the Earth, sent a signal back to the Earth. On April 28, 2001, Pioneer 10, the first space probe to fly out of the Solar System, sent a signal back to Earth in space 11.2 billion kilometers after losing contact with the Earth for 8 months. Pioneer 10, launched in March 1972, was the first spacecraft to pass unharmed through the meteorite belt between Mars and Mercury and send back pictures of Jupiter and Saturn, the first to arrive at Mercury, and the first to fly over Pluto's orbit and leave the Solar System. Pioneer 10, which flew out of the Solar System in June 1986 and retired on March 31, 1997, is now about 11 billion kilometers away from Earth. It will continue to move in the direction of Taurus and, if successful, will arrive in Taurus in 2 million years.